Hi, my name is Keith Rucker, and today we're going to be working on the second part of a series of videos that I'm working on how to build a wooden pattern to basically send to a foundry and have a part made out of cast iron. Now, in the first video that we did as this series, we worked on basically gluing up a couple of these blanks right here in which we were going to turn our pattern out on the lathe. Now this is the piece that basically we're making. This is a flat belt pulley that went on a antique J.A. Vance planer matcher, probably built around 1900, 1910, somewhere in that time period. And unfortunately during the restoration, this piece right here was messed up. So we're gonna basically working on building a pattern to make a new piece of these, to have a new piece cast out of cast iron. Now, I suppose that we could have just made a piece out of steel, turned this on lathe, did a lot of machine work and got that done. And that would have worked, but we really are interested in trying to keep this machine as accurate as possible. This is a museum that we're working for here and doing this restoration for, so we want this to be as historically accurate as we possibly can. And cast iron is really the right material to use. That's what it would have been made from before. And cast iron does just a much better job of gripping pulleys than steel would. So after we glued these things up, obviously on the bottom side here, it's fairly flat, but there is a little bit of irregularities in there. So the first thing we're going to do to these pieces to get them ready is we need to get these things just as flat as we can, because the two halves are basically going to sandwich each other like this, and we will then turn a cylinder and then turn the part out of it on the wood lathe. So to start with, I'm going to do something I'm a little bit nervous about. This really is probably may not be the best way to do it, but I'm actually going to run this over the joiner first, which a joiner, of course, it has a spinning knife on it, kind of like a planer, but you can use it for flattening. The reason I'm a little bit nervous about it, though, is that normally on the joiner you will joint edge grain, but in this case we pretty much have all end grain on here. So as that cutter's cutting, I know I'm going to get a little bit of cut out or tear out on the ends, but the ends of this really isn't that important, because we're basically going to cut them off anyway, as you'll see in a little bit. So I'm going to just take a really light cut and make multiple cuts and try to get this flat, and then we'll come over here and finish it out by sanding it flat on a flat surface here. Okay, we're set up over here on the joiner now. This is a Delta Rockwell 8-inch long bed joiner, probably about a mid-70s vintage, really nice machine. And we just got new knives put on here in the last couple of weeks, nice and sharp. So we're going to just, like again, we've got this thing set up. We're going to be cutting across the grain. I'm a little bit nervous about this because you tend to get a lot of tear out when you do end grain, but because it is such a long piece and we're not worried about the ends, I'm hoping everything's going to work on this. I've got this set on a really light cut. It's probably about between a 16th and a 32nd of an inch, so it'll take us several passes to get across this to get it done. And I'll also note that I have moved the guard out of the way, which I don't like working on a joiner without the guard, but because of the width of this piece, it actually won't slide past the guard with it on there. So we've just moved it out of the way for right now. So again, normally I like to use a guard. Okay, we've ran this across the joiner now and got a good flat surface in there. Maybe just a little bit of room in here, but I think we can get that out with the sandpaper okay. Now that I've got the bottoms of these pretty much flat on the joiner, it is still a little bit rough, just simply because, again, we were cutting across end grain here, which is not the best way to use a joiner, but it is probably the quickest way to get some material moved and get it relatively flat. So now we're going to come in here and basically use some sandpaper to get this flat and smooth and a nice surface that we can make together. And to do that, I'm just going to again take some 60 grit sandpaper. We're going to glue it down to the top of this unisaw where we have a flat table here, and that'll give us a flat surface that we can sand on to get this down. I'm just going to use some spray adhesive and get these glued down. All right, now that I've got the bottoms of these pieces flat, my next step is to just kind of lay out in there. I like to just put on the piece of wood in this middle, kind of the cross section of the part that I'm going to turn out. So you can see I have sketched on here and tried to cross hatch that out where you can kind of see it. Basically the shape it's going to be. So, you know, this is the pulley. You know, that we're basically going to try to get out of this. So if you see right here, if you can see this, you know, this is the flange. That's the body of the long body of the pulley. And then on the ends, I have what I call my core prints, and this is going to be the hollow section. So there's a shaft that's going to go through this. So we're going to actually have a piece that goes all the way through this in the pattern. Or in the mold that will come out hollow when it's done, and also because the end of the pulley, you can see it goes down in here. There's going to be a core print that will actually go inside of here, but I need a piece sticking out of the backside to register in the mold where that core is going to go. So I'll leave this core print here sticking out of the back. And again, I think this will make a little more sense if you can't visualize what we're doing as we move along a little farther and we start on the actual core box. So. Just bear with me for the right now if you're not following this. I think again it'll make better sense later. But I've kind of got that sketched out. I hope that's going to show up on the camera. But again, that's just to kind of help me visualize what I'm going to be working on. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drill some holes in here. And you can kind of see I've kind of put some circles in here. I'm going to drill some holes, and we're going to put some dowel rods in here, and that will help hold this piece together as we're turning it, and it'll also help when you put the two pieces together later on, they will register together. So we'll drill a hole there, and then I will put these, use some index pieces to go in those holes, and then I will put the other piece on top of it where I know to drill my other holes, and they'll all go together very nicely. So we have got this piece ready to drill out. I've got a drill bit in the drill press. So we're just going to punch about 4 holes in here. The dowel rods will go in to index these pieces together. I got them just in there randomly. I don't really want them spaced out any particular way, and the main reason is that if they're kind of just in there random, when the pattern will only go together one way. So if someone were to try to turn the pattern around and put it on there backwards, it just won't fit. So I think we're going to be fine there. Now we're going to index these two together. So I've got some of these little pins like this right here. There's there's like a little center punch on the top of this. And this is made to fit down those dowel holes. So I've got 4 of those in here. And now I'm just going to take the other half of the piece and I'm going to set it on top. And we're going to line this up. Actually, I think that goes, yeah, that's better. We're going to line these up, front and back, make sure they're kind of in line with one another. And I'm just going to push down on them to get those center punch holes to register with one another, and that will give me a place to go and drill to get these, get them where they'll match up. Before I take it apart though, I am going to take a pencil and I'm just going to mark on this end right here. And that way I'll know which side mates up before I start turning it on the lathe. Alright, now that we've got these pins in here, I've let this glue dry for a little while. I'm not worried about them coming back out now. So now the next plan is I want to be able to get these 2 halves put together strong enough that they'll stay together while I turn this. And then I can basically cut the pieces out or whatever. So I've got about 2 inches on the front and the back here. That's basically just waste material. There's nothing special about it at all. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put some glue on here. We're going to glue these together. We'll clamp it together and I'll probably reinforce that with some screws. And you know, when we get through with this, I'll just take it to the bandsaw and cut those off. And the center section won't have anything holding it together, and the pattern should separate in 2 pieces after we get through turning on the lathe. So for right now, we're just going to put a little bit of glue on here, just enough to kind of give it some extra strength to hold it together. We'll put that together and I'm going to grab some C-clamps and we'll just put on the ends here and let that glue set up. We let this piece of wood dry up in the clamps real good, actually for a couple of days before I had a chance to get back out here and do the next work. But now what I want to do is actually, in addition to the glue, we want to get some extra strength to just make sure this piece stays together. We've already got the pins in there, and as that's rotating, that's going to actually help hold it together. In addition, we glued 2 inches on either end. But now what I'm going to do is actually put some screws in the end pieces where it's glued, just to give me a little bit more confidence. Because of the length of the screws in here, though, I'm going to drill a pilot hole, just 2 pilot holes on either side, and then I will put the screw down in there, and that'll give me plenty of material that I can turn on the outside without having to worry about hitting a screw. So we're going to go ahead and just punch some 1/2-inch holes in here, and again, that'll just give me some clearance to get a screw down there into the bottom. With these pilot holes in here now, I'm ready to just take a couple of wood screws and we're just going to stick them down in here and just give us some extra strength there. Alright, I'm confident now that when I put this on the lathe, it's not going to fly apart on me. We've got pins in there that are holding it to give it some force that's going into the piece across from it to pull it around. We've got glue on the ends that's helping hold these together. Plus I've got 4 screws on the ends to hold it all together. So this should be a good solid piece of wood that I can stick on the wood lathe now and we can start turning. After going over and looking at my lathe and deciding how I'm going to mount this to the lathe, I had a couple of choices. The first, I could just use a spur, but because of the this being a segmented piece, I was a little bit worried we weren't going into end grain on that spur, that drive spur, and I was just worried we'd get a lot of tear out. I looked around, we had some face plates, and I really think this is going to be the best way to attach this to the lathe for a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm gripping it out on a larger radius, a larger diameter, which is just going to give me a little bit more torque on this as I'm turning it. I think that's going to be helpful. And another advantage of using a faceplate in this application is because it is a split pattern, and you know we've already glued it, we've already put screws in there, we've got pins in there to help hold it together. Actually, the screws in here is going to give us one more level of comfort as we're turning this to be able to keep it together, because these screws will actually go in on either side of the split that goes across the entire pattern. So that's going to just kind of help keep it together as we're turning on the lathe. So anyway, I just took a faceplate, took 4 screws, screwed that in there, and this is pretty much ready to go on the lathe now. Before I get too far along in this project, I want to kind of have a game plan. So what I did was I came over here with my pulley that I'm copying, got out some measuring tools, and I just made a sketch of what I want. And I don't know if you'll be able to see that. There we go. That is basically just a very rough cartoon drawing of what I'm trying to get at. Obviously it's not to scale, obviously it's not even got straight lines on it, but it's good enough for me to work off of. It's got my measurements, it's got my dimensions, and it gives me what I'm looking for. And you can see I have basically the outline of the pulley itself, the flange, as well as my core prints that I'll be turning on there, which again we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to it. But I have a game plan, and now I'm going to go over to the lathe and start turning this thing out. Alright, we have the piece mounted on the lathe now, so we put it on the faceplate. We just screwed that on there. I've got a center end down here on the end to give us some support. I wish I had one that had a little bit larger diameter, but that's what I got to work with. And the first step we're going to do is we're just going to try to get this turned down to a smooth cylinder. To do that, I'm just going to use a regular gouge for doing roughing work, and we'll get to turning. Okay, we're getting pretty close here to having this round. I've still got just a little bit of rough spot right in there, but still, it's getting very close. This is just a rough turn here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably start, I've still got time to clean up some of this area here. So right now what I think I'm going to do is just take a break, kind of sketch out where I want my different lines to be on this, and then we'll start actually turning out the different components and cleaning it up as we go and getting everything smoothed out just right. Now that I have my part just roughly laid out here with some lines, the next step that I want to do is I want to go ahead and actually start making some depth cuts into this, and just kind of indexing the points, so that when I start turning this, I'll have some references to work off of. So as an example here, I know that on this end down here where my core print is, that's going to be 3 inches in diameter, And on this inch, actually, my core print is going to be 1.25 inches. But for right now, I'm just going to turn it down to 3 inches as well, because I want to leave some meat on this end, because I don't want to have just a real small spindle turning all this. And I can turn that final diameter down later. So I've got a set of just spring calipers here. And I've set this to 3 inches using my shrink rule. And what I will do is take my Bedan tool, and basically it's just about a 3/8 inch square cutter, sharpened off nice and sharp, and I'm gonna basically use it about like I would a parting tool to go in there, and using my calipers I'll come in behind it and get those diameters. And again, that's just something I can use as a reference as I start turning this down. So we'll get started with that. Okay, now that we have these pieces cut, basically between these two, this one and this one, that's just all going to be cut out, and I'll do that in a little bit. Right now I just want to get all my register diameters to work off of. So the next thing we're going to do, again, these will be the core prints on either end. This part in the middle will be where the actual pulley will be turned. So the next thing is there's a flange. That flange is about a 1/2 inch wide at its widest point, and it goes down to a diameter of 3.5 inches on the inside. So again, I'm going to set my calipers. I will set it probably about to 3 3/4 inches. Again, I just want to have some room. This is just rough right now. I'm just kind of roughing this diameter out. So I want to have some plenty of room to work with to fine tune it when I get down in there. So we'll come in here, we'll make a measure over a 1/2 inch and go down to a diameter of 3 3/4 inches. Start by setting my calipers. It's 3 3/4. Grab my Bedan tool, and first thing we'll do is we'll measure over a 1/2 inch and then go into that diameter. Next step here again is the diameter of the pulley on this end is also going to be about 3.5 inches, same as the other end. It'll be crowned in the center. So as long as while we got our caliper set to 3 3/4 inches, we'll just go ahead and make a reference cut right here on this end. And finally, again, that pulley will be crowned in the center. The middle diameter is going to be 4 inches, so I've got my caliper set to about 4 1/4 inches, and we'll just make a reference cut here in the center. And then after we have that, we can start removing the material in here and basically know about how deep we need to go because we have these reference cuts in place. Here's a different view, different angle, just so you can see those reference cuts in there that I'm working with. And now I can start removing the waste out of this project, and basically I know exactly how deep I need to go and without having to do a lot of measurements along the way. Okay, for the waste removal, what I'm going to use is a 3/8 inch bowl gouge. I'm choosing to use a bowl gouge in this application just simply because this is a segmented piece glued up and we have a lot of that long grain that we're turning. A bowl gouge, just the geometry of it, is designed to cut through long grain better than, say, a roughing gouge. Or I could use a spindle gouge for this as well, but I'm just going to try this bowl gouge, give it a try. You'll probably see me changing tools as we go through here. I'll probably also use some scrapers as I get down there a little bit closer to the the final diameter that I want to be at, and start making some finishing cuts. So let's go ahead and we'll just start cutting all this waste out. And again, just to get a different angle on this, you can see what I've turned out of here. You're starting to see the shape of the pulley up here. So basically this is the pulley part right here. You see the core print in here. This will actually be a piece that fits down in there that will go into the pattern and be kind of the hollow spot inside of it. Be a second piece that goes in there. But you can see the outside shape of the pulley starting to take place. Again, these diameters right now are just rough diameters. I'm just trying to get this thing roughed out. So now that I've really got it down kind of close, we're going to go in here and, using a little bit finer tools, start really shaping this thing out and getting our final dimensions exactly where we want them to be. But as you can see, it's taking shape very nicely now. With the piece rough turned now I'm going to get in here with some scrapers and some other turning tools, and just try to finish this off and get it down to its final dimensions where we want it to be. Alright, we're getting very close to having this pretty much down. The pulley part, I got the core print on the back side. The large core print is to its final size. This is pretty much to its final size through here. We just need to do a little sanding on it. One thing I will mention is you saw me coming in here with that little bevel tool. I put just a little bit of an angle on this back edge rather than making it flat. And the reason that is that when it goes into the sand mold, it needs to be able to pull out real easily. So typically in patterns, on anything like that, we like to have about a 1 to 2 degree draft rather than just a perfectly straight line where it's going to be coming out of the sand. And that just makes it come out a little bit easier. The pattern won't catch as it pulls out. I did the same thing on this flat side of this face of the pulley over here. Just put a little bit of an angle on there. I've used my scraping tool. This is pretty smooth. I think I am going to come in here and actually use a little bit of epoxy or some super glue and some sawdust or whatever and kind of fill in. I got a couple of small cracks here where my joints weren't just perfectly tight, so I'll just fill those in, and then we'll come back with a piece of sandpaper, sand this up. And then probably the last thing I'll do is on this back side back here. Right now this is about 3 inches in diameter, and it needs to go down to about an inch, about an inch and a quarter, I think is, yeah, on my drawing, 1 1/4 inch will be the final diameter of this piece in here. I left it a little bit big. I think I mentioned this earlier, just so that I'll have enough meat here to actually spin this whole thing. So the last thing I'll do is I get in there with a spindle gouge or something and turn that down to a smaller diameter. Then we'll take a scraper, get it to the right size, and then this piece will be ready to come off. So my next step now is I'm going to go ahead and just fill in some of these little cracks, and then probably sand this, and then go in there and turn that final size down. I've just pulled the pattern off the lathe, and as you can see, we got everything pretty much the way we want it. You can see the pulley in here in the center, and here's the one behind it to kind of compare it to. So you got to see we've got the same profile. One thing I will mention here is you know, we will come in here once this is cast, and we're going to put this on the metal lathe, and we're going to turn basically this profile and clean this up, get the rough out, make it perfectly true and round. So this surface will be machined. Because it is machined, or will be machined, we did leave a little bit of extra thickness on here. As a general rule, for every surface that's going to be machined, about 1/8 of an inch extra thickness is what is generally called for. So because this is going to be turned on the metal lathe, and we'll be removing metal from both sides, I made it about 1/4 of an inch larger diameter than the pulley that we have back here. And again, once we get through, we will be able to machine that off. Same goes for the core prints here. Now that you kind of see the shape here, I think you can start to imagine how these core prints are going to work. So if you think of the actual pulley here as one piece, and then the pieces inside, this is actually going to be a piece of sand that will fit inside the mold. And think of this as the shaft, and then this is just going to be another piece that goes in here where we have this hollow end inside this end. But that right there will be inside the void where you're going to fill in, that will be filled in. So that you can knock that sand out of the piece, and you'll have the holes in the actual casting. But again, it's going to have to be machined. Obviously that's a shaft running through here. So we made the diameter of this about 1/4 of an inch smaller diameter than the actual shaft that we want to have turned, because we'll actually bore that out on the metal lathe once we get the casting back from the foundry. So the pattern is pretty much done. All I'm going to do now is just go to the bandsaw and just cut these two ends off, and and then we'll check it out, and then we'll have to make the actual core box for the core. That will be the final part of what we do with this pattern. So we'll go to the bandsaw and cut this off. Pulley is pretty much finished now, or the pattern is pretty much finished now, and as you can see, it's all pretty much done. You have the core prints on either side. We call this again a split pulley, and now you can really see it because the pulley actually separates into two pieces. Okay, and you see the pins in there where you can put it back together, and it will be back together. The reason that's important is in the molding process at the foundry. What they will do is they will lay this piece here down flat on a piece of table just like this. There will be what they call a flask, or what holds the mold that goes around. It's just a frame, and they'll basically pile molding sand in on top of that, pack it down real tight. The molding sand kind of has it kind of grips when you do it. It has some additives in there to kind of make it hold whatever shape it's in. Think of it as something like Play-Doh. It's not Play-Doh, but think of it as Play-Doh. If you were to just pack that around there, and they would, across the top of that mold, that flask, they'll make that sand flat, and then they'll flip it over. And when you flip it over, you see the bottom of the pattern sticking up in sand. It's just all the way around. It's all flush with the top. They'll come in, lay this piece on top, use the pins to hold it in place, and they put a second layer of that flask on there. They'll put some parting dust in here so that the sand does not stick together, and they'll put more sand in on top, pack it down tight again, and then the two flasks will separate apart from one another, and half the the pattern will be in the top part of the flask, half the pattern will be in the bottom part of the flask. They'll remove the pattern out of the sand, put the flask back together where you have the void where the pattern just came from, and of course you will put the core prints or the core actually in there. So think of the core is going to look something like this right here. So this inside area here will have a round piece of sand going through it, and of course it will leave, once that sand is removed out from the inside of the casting, that area will all be hollow. So we're pretty much through with the pattern itself. The only thing really left to do to it is we'll put a finish on it, a shellac finish, just so that it'll be waterproof, and also we'll paint it, and we'll paint it different colors to let the foundry know what different parts are. So just this outside surface here, that's the actual the part of the actual casting, we'll paint that black. The core prints where the core will go in, we'll paint red, and that way they'll tell the foundry man, the molder, when he sees that red, he'll know that that's where the core print goes in. Then we'll actually make the core box for the core to go in. That'll be the next step that we do, probably in the next video. So the pattern is pretty much done, and we'll work on the core box next.